Television's continuing coverage of the Vermont primaries. Tonight we are speaking in our wood paneled rooms to the candidates for District 4-2, the Democratic primary. We have Bill incumbent and Christina Deeley, who is the challenger. I welcome you both and thank you both for joining us. I'm going to just go right into your opening statements, and I'm going to have Bill, Christina, and then the next question, Christina, you would be the person to start. So Bill, why don't you tell us why you're running and what experience you bring to the position of the House of Representatives in the state of Vermont for your district?
Great, thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here tonight. Well, let me start by saying that working to build safe and healthy communities has been my life's work. For 10 years, I counseled children, families, and adults as a mental health counselor and as an alcohol and drug abuse counselor at the Counseling Service of Addison County. I helped people recover from depression, suicide attempts, and alcohol and drug abuse, often brought on by the hurts of child sexual abuse, domestic violence, and physical abuse. Eventually, I became the director of mental health services and later the executive director of the entire agency. I loved helping people as individuals, but realized that often there were larger and deeper social issues that impacted people's lives, and decided to run for the legislature, where I believed larger groups of people could be helped by decisions made in Montpelier. I was right. I'm running for re-election as Hinesburg state representative because I want to continue my work in the legislature to build safe and healthy Vermont communities. As the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and now as chair of the House Healthcare Committee, I've been able to touch and even sometimes save Vermonters' lives by taking the lead in passing legislation to reduce drunken driving on our Vermont highways, save lives amidst the opiate epidemic by mandating that the overdose reversal drug Narcan be made widely and easily available, and by creating civil unions and marriage equality for same-sex couples, something that was once thought or seen as impossible. In just the last few days, the governor signed a bill appropriating over $300 million in federal coronavirus relief funds to support our Vermont healthcare system's financial recovery from the pandemic. Earlier, the governor signed into law emergency provisions to protect Vermonters' access to healthcare, as well as legislation providing for telehealth during this pandemic. I'm proud that it was our House Healthcare Committee that initially crafted these critical pieces of legislation. These are just a few of the highlights of my legislative work. There's much more to be done, and I look forward to it. I want to bring my experience and leadership back to the legislature to help to continue building safe and healthy Vermont communities.
Thank you so much, Bill. Christina, why are you running and what qualifies you for the position to represent Hinesburg in the House?
Well, thank you for asking and thanks for having us tonight, as Bill said. So I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm a librarian, I'm a union member. And one of the things I think is super important to acknowledge right now is the state of our country. The dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism have shined a light on the truth of our country's many system and policy failures. And that truth reaches us here in Vermont and here in Hinesburg. Even in Vermont, Black people and other people of color are disproportionately impacted by the virus. And Black people and other people of color are disproportionately impacted by police violence, arrests, and incarceration. People often talk about two Vermonts, one for those who have and one for those who have not. But there are many more Vermonts, depending on the layers of identity privilege a person has. For example, I have seen the mental health and social challenges faced by my students and their families, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, ability, or socioeconomic status. After sitting in the emergency department with my own family member suffering a mental health crisis and spending countless hours navigating through the mental health care system, I knew it was time to work for systemic change, because if I have to fight this hard, I can't imagine what other families are going through. And that's why I'm here today, to fight for systemic change.
Thank you so much, Christina. What would be different because you were in the legislature 2 years from now?
Yeah. So as my friend Molly Gray likes to say, same people, same outcomes. And I believe that people in Hinesburg are ready for new outcomes. This means that people in the district will get a representative who is incredibly responsive, Hinesburg is ready for a representative who listens to the people who live here and respects what they have to say, regardless of what it is they have to say. As an educator, I understand how important it is to listen to my students, my colleagues, and parents and other community members. I also understand how important it is to answer emails and phone calls in a timely manner, and I'm committed to doing so as a representative. Hinesburgers are ready to be heard, and I'm ready to listen. On a more macro level, I will be a representative who always prioritizes family paid leave and childcare, protecting voter access, equitable and affordable education, expansion of health and mental health care services, and the promotion of equity and inclusion in all forms.
So Christina, just to put a fine point on it,
Yeah.
what do you think will be different? I mean, you've outlined your aspirations, but what will have changed?
So what will be different is that Hinesburg will have a voice in the legislature that represents who they are. Over 40% of Hinesburgers currently have minor children living in their house. Of the 10 people who represent Hinesburgers in Montpelier and Washington, D.C., only one of them has minor children, and the average age is over 65 years old. Hinesburg is a family community that is growing, and they need someone in there who recognizes what's going on with young families in this state.
Okay, thank you so much. Bill, after the next 2 years, presuming you win, what will have changed because you were a representative in the House?
Well, recently someone asked me if passing legislation ever really changes attitudes. I believe it does, particularly when combined with community activism and organizing. I will take back to Montpelier my conviction that profound social change is possible, my hopefulness about the future, my years of experience, and my understanding that successfully making social change and legislation requires that you have vision, commitment, and persistence. Most major changes require running a marathon, not just a sprint. When was the last time you saw a billboard along a Vermont highway or someone light up a cigarette in a Vermont restaurant? These were once unthinkable ideas. Vision, commitment, and persistence by Vermonters brought this about, as well as the lowest smoking rate among teenagers ever, saving lives, building healthy communities. For decades, I worked alongside of others to change the climate of Vermont for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Vermonters. My vision for Vermont was and still is a Vermont where all persons, including all LGBTQ Vermonters and all persons of color, are welcomed, valued, and able to thrive.
So again, sorry to interrupt you, but again, these sound aspirational to me. Is there something concrete that will have changed?
What I believe is concrete is that I will have the experience to address issues of healthcare, to address issues of systemic racism based on my work with colleagues, my bipartisan ability to work with groups of legislators, and my desire to make social change.
So I think that thank you. I think that both of you have talked about the issues that are important to you. So I'm going to go to the question about the budget. Given the unprecedented challenges to our expenses and revenue in this year coming up, how do you propose to approach the budget making process, and what do you consider to be the priorities? Bill?
Well, the budget is the priority. And I think we need to understand that we are still in the midst of the legislative session. We're working in unprecedented times. We at the legislature have been legislating by Zoom. We've been working remotely and voting remotely. I've been chairing the House Healthcare Committee remotely. We recessed on June 26th, and we're going to return on August 26th to do the full year budget. The revenue losses are profound for Vermont. What we will continue to do is to prioritize issues that make change in the long term rather than just in the short term. The Appropriations Committee has asked each of our committees, the healthcare committees, the Commerce Committee, and others, to make priority recommendations to the committee in the same way that we did with the Corona Relief Funds, which we just appropriated. Because this is a collaborative process, we in the House Healthcare Committee, on a bipartisan, actually a tripartisan basis, were able to recommend changes in the budget and set our priorities, such as making sure that suicide prevention was at the top of the list for mental health care, that a warm line was part of the response to the coronavirus relief funding. I believe that the budget reflects our priorities, and that where we put our money is where our priorities are. And I think that that will be the guiding light of the budget building process, both this September and again in the new biennium.
Thank you, Bill. Christina Deeley, your approach to the budget, what do you think are the priorities and how do you propose to approach this process?
So I think we need to protect our most vulnerable people in the state. It's hard to predict what this will look like in terms of budgeting without seeing where the numbers are for next year or even this year. As Bill said, it's still a work in progress. On budget votes, I will always ask myself, what in this package is furthering the access and opportunity gaps that exist? How are we reaching the people long term? What are we doing about the 25% of people who still don't have broadband access? Are we finding ways to ask some people to pay more so more people can thrive? We as a state need to make investments in people in order to have a better future. A good example of this in the news recently was the rental housing stabilization program, which I'm sure Bill knows a lot about. It provides funds to landlords who didn't receive rent payments during the pandemic. And even though this program was created in response to an unprecedented crisis, its goals are clear. Keep as many Vermonters as possible in their homes and protect the financial stability of our statewide network of affordable housing. The state is making an investment to protect vulnerable people, and that's what we need more of.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go on to a question I think that is probably dear to your heart, Christina, and that is education. Given the decline in the student population in most parts of Vermont, how can the state and localities continue to afford to deliver high quality education? And that means taking care of the teachers as well as the students.
I think this is a question for the ages here in Vermont, right? We have a great education system, but it's obvious that Act 46 hasn't worked. The Supreme Court recently ruled that the forced mergers are constitutional, but the law is not being implemented to its word. School boards all over the state are using Act 46 as an excuse to close and consolidate schools, even though the law says it is not the state's intent to close schools. Even in districts like our own here, CVSD, there hasn't necessarily been a large benefit. We were already operating with one superintendent for years, and while there have been some financial efficiencies, we have less control over our elementary school because we don't have our own board. And it's increasingly, apparent that our district is not providing equitable experiences for Hinesburg students. For example, Hinesburg Community School does not have full-time principals, unlike other schools in our district. Our classrooms are extremely outdated. Our students don't have access to maker spaces. Other schools have school-wide reading initiatives. This is all in sharp contrast to what students in Shelburne and Williston receive. And if our wealthy district in Chittenden County is incapable of providing equitable learning experiences, what's happening with the districts that lack our funding? Additionally, something that's extremely important to me is the federal government recently notified the state that we're not in compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, something I experienced as a parent trying to work through the system, not only as an educator. Vermont's interpretation and implementation of the IDEA Act needs a serious overhaul. I have seen this firsthand, and changes have to be made so our students can have the education they deserve. Schools were already providing education, meals, and social services to our students, and they have stepped up even more in the pandemic. We're feeding children at a significant cost. Now we have to buy thermometers, extra busing, cleaning supplies, materials. The schools are doing the work. It's time for the legislature to support them.
Thank you so much. Bill Lippert, what is your view of how to balance the question of funding education so all students can benefit and teachers can also be compensated?
We've made important strides in Vermont in trying to provide education opportunities across districts. Act 46 actually, I believe, has benefited our district. We've not had the kind of conflict that other districts have had because we've been proactive and including curriculum development across schools and work on behalf of students, giving opportunities in different schools based on the ability to share positions. I believe that one of the major issues for us as we look ahead is how to safely open our schools. I think we are faced with the decisions about how to bring our students back into the schools and bring our education to our students in an equitable manner, whether it's online or in person. I believe that we need to focus as well on the ability of our students to move beyond their high school education. We have one of the highest graduation rates in the country, but we have one of the lowest rates of students going on to further education, whether it's in further technical education or to higher education. We need to focus on developing schools which bring students into the future while maintaining the quality that we've developed over the years.
And how would we pay for that?
Well, I think we need to continue to look at raising additional dollars through increasing progressivity of our income-sensitive property tax. We are unique in the country in having income-sensitive property taxes available to Vermonters. While property taxes continue to be pressure for many, many Vermonters, we have provided the kind of relief and assistance that makes it possible for folks to continue to hold their homes while also living in the community.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go to the COVID-19 question because I think it ties in some of the other questions. What do you think is the biggest impact, starting with you, Bill? What is the biggest impact from the last 4 months, 5 months? I don't know how many months it is of COVID shutdowns.
Yeah.
And what role does the legislature have to play in addressing these impacts?
I think one of the largest impacts has been on our healthcare system. We have so much to be grateful for in that the Vermont healthcare system, everything from our hospitals to our independent medical practices, virtually turned on a dime, stopped doing elective procedures where most of the money is generated, and started preparing to save Vermonters' lives in the midst of what we thought was going to be a far, far more serious COVID surge. What we've done now is, in fact, just yesterday, the governor signed $300 million of COVID relief funds to go back into the healthcare system of Vermont to save our healthcare system from financial distress. Without a healthcare system, we will not be prepared for further impacts of the pandemic. We must continue as well. We've appropriated over $1 billion in federal relief funds. As Christina mentioned, we've appropriated funds for rental relief. We've appropriated funds for food insecurity, for businesses to recover from closing down on short notice. I think we, frankly, are dependent in large part on a lot of federal assistance because, in fact, Vermont does not have the resources to underwrite all of the losses that have been sustained in the course of the pandemic.
All right, very good. Thank you. Christina, your view of the biggest impact from the COVID shutdowns and how the legislature should address these impacts. Thank you.
So COVID-19 has shown our state how vulnerable we truly are. It has shown us that too many people are a paycheck away from not being able to feed their families. seeing the cars lined up for hours to receive boxes of food is unacceptable. It's shown us that we rely on our schools to provide food for our children and their social services, and how difficult it is for our children when those supports are taken away. As thousands of people face sudden unemployment, it's shown us that health insurance should not and cannot be tied to employment to succeed. Suicides have risen, as have overdoses. Businesses have closed and people are suffering. The legislature has started to act, and they need to take note of which systems are failing and why. Throwing money at the problems will not solve the long-term problems. Only systemic changes will. This is the opportunity to address those changes. The other thing COVID has done is show us how strong Vermonters are. We continue to support ourselves through difficult times. Communities are rallying together to make sure people are safe and fed. We have an amazing little free pantry in Hinesburg where people are bringing their garden supplies for people. We've stepped up and supported our farmers and our local businesses by ordering online and picking food up and picking vegetables up and picking plants up. And I feel like Hinesburg has really come together during this time. And I'm happy to see that in the face of a crisis, we can be neighbors and support each other.
Christina, are you satisfied that Vermont, the state, the legislature is doing enough to dismantle systemic racism?
Absolutely. I am very interested in this topic. Just this morning, Burlington declared that racism is a public health emergency, and Vermont is not an outlier. The Vermont chapter of the ACLU and researchers at UVM have shown that Black people in our state are stopped and searched and arrested disproportionately to white people. As an educator, I work with CVU's Racial Alliance Committee, and I've learned about racist incidents in our school almost every day when students come into my office crying. Students are accosted, bullied, and physically harmed because of the color of their skin. The N-word is used in our school to attack Black students. Right before we transitioned to remote learning, our Asian student population was starting to get insults about the coronavirus. Unfortunately, this is often played out as the perpetrators are just ignorant or they were only joking. But the intent is almost universally valued over impact, because even though we've held assemblies, we add books to the curriculum, we've raised the Black Lives Matter flag, too many in our community mistake not racist for anti-racist. Racism is in the DNA of this country. As my brave student and friend, Christelle Tanoki, said during her CVU speech, racism is not getting worse, it's getting filmed. And while I have high hopes for the Ethnic Studies Coalition and the changes that could come to our school curriculum, it isn't enough and it's not fast enough. All of our children need to understand their identity privileges and how this is going to change their lives and the world. Even in Hinesburg, we had white nationalist stickers put up on our town, put on the flag, the pride flag at the church. Luckily, the police is watching for it, but it's happening in our town, and we can't just let our students lead the charge on this. The adults have to be there too.
Thank you very much. Bill, what's your response to how effective the legislature has been in dismantling systemic racism in Vermont?
There's a lot more that we need to do. We focused on appointing a director of racial equity for the state of Vermont, but we didn't give her the resources to continue to do effectively the work that she's undertaking. We need to give additional appropriation and staff to Susanna Davis as she does her work. We have begun fair and impartial policing policies, but the policies need to be enforced and the policies need to be consistent across the state. We need to listen more to the affected and targeted communities of color, as well as our Native communities. I am pleased that just this week, Governor Scott signed 2 bills to support the Indigenous Abenaki people of Vermont, bills that restore the taken away fishing and hunting rights, which were guaranteed by a treaty, and helping to establish a broader understanding of their culture by including Abenaki names on labels or signs at the state parks across the state. But these are symbolic, and these are small efforts. I completely share the point of view that racism is in the DNA of our country. We need to continue to build upon the curriculum changes that Christina mentioned, that we need to learn about our real history. We need to understand what it means that this country was built on a system of slavery and genocide of Native peoples. I believe that we can do this by continuing to work together and listening first to the affected communities before simply rushing forward with actions that we, as well-intended white allies, can put in place.
Thank you. Bill, do you have a question for Christina?
Well, someone asked me what it is that Christina wants to do that would be significantly different than what's happening currently in the legislature. And so I would give Christina an opportunity to say more about that.
Thank you. Christina.
Thanks, Bill. So I think what would be different is that I am going to really focus on paid family leave and childcare. I know that you've been doing a lot with healthcare and mental health care, but I really feel like families in Vermont are struggling. Families in Hinesburg talk about how they moved to Hinesburg because it was an affordable place in Chittenden County, and now it's becoming unaffordable for them. And I think that I will prioritize what families are saying their children need. The women in this state are overwhelmingly burdened with childcare, work, and it's limiting their access to live full lives. And I think that when I am in office, that's something that I will prioritize.
Thank you so much. Christina, do you have a question for Bill?
I don't have a question for Bill. I just want to say, Bill, I appreciate everything you've done for Hinesburg for the last 25 plus years. You've been an amazing advocate and warrior for the LGBTQ community, and I am just appreciative of the work you've done, and I'm glad that you've been my representative, and I hope that when I am in office, I can follow in your proud footsteps.
Thank you. Do you have a closing comment? You have a minute. Christina.
Yeah, sure. Let's see what I have here. So basically, if you believe that healthcare is a human right, if you believe climate change is real and needs to be addressed, if you believe we need to teach our students the real and hard history of this country in order to fight racial injustice, if you believe we need to close the many access and opportunity gaps that exist for women, and if you believe women deserve equal pay for equal work, then please consider voting for me in this August primary. I'm excited to get out there and represent you.
Thank you, Christina Deeley. Bill Lippert, your closing comments.
Well, thank you. Interestingly, I think Christina and I share many of the same aspirations and policy goals. The difference is that I've actually been voting and helping to implement these goals in the State House and at the legislature over a period of years. I think I've demonstrated the ability to be bipartisan, to make change, and to create social change that touches people's lives. I'm proud to have been endorsed by the Vermont conservation voters, by Rights and Democracy, and to have a 100% scorecard from Planned Parenthood. I welcome people in Vermont and in Hinesburg to examine my legislative record. I think it's a record of achievement. I think it's a record of being responsive to neighbors and friends in Hinesburg. I'll close with a quote from someone who, I won't give their name, but they sent me an email and I was very pleased. They said, "I just wanted to tell you, of all the people I contacted, you were the fastest to reply and the nicest. I know we have our political differences, but I really do appreciate how helpful and quick to respond you have always been." This is from someone with whom I have serious political differences, but I have been nonpartisan in responding and helping every Hinesburg person who has reached out to me for help, whether it's with the tax department or the recent surge of unemployment claims, which simply are not getting responded to. I've spent several days now helping to reach the commissioner and getting responses and resolutions for Hinesburg residents. I welcome you to examine my record, and I welcome you to be in touch, and I would welcome your support in the August 11th primary.
Thank you so much. Bill Lippert is the incumbent for District 4-2 representing Hinesburg. Christina Deeley is running for against him in the Democratic primary, which you said was August 12th. Want to make sure that's right. So 11th, sorry, August 11th.
Do we agree on the date?
If you haven't had a chance to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. August 11th is the primary, but certainly voting is open now, so you can request ballots to vote. You don't need to wait until August 11th to make that happen. So folks in Hinesburg, you will see Christina Deeley and Bill Lippert on your ballot. So don't forget to vote. And thank you so much for watching Town Meeting Television's continuing coverage of the primary and general elections 2020. Thanks. Good night.